The taste of sweet revenge lingered on my tongue as I stepped into the boardroom, my Louboutins clicking against the marble floor. Every head turned, eyes widening in disbelief. I, Avery Blackwood, the disgraced daughter they'd thought they'd never see again, was back. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me, "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." 3 years ago, I was just another trust fund baby, more concerned with charity galas than corporate takeovers. That all changed the day I met Zephyr Crane, a brilliant but penniless artist who opened my eyes to a world beyond the gilded cage of the Blackwood fortune. My parents, Thaddeus and Cordelia Blackwood, didn't see the man I loved. They only saw a threat to their carefully curated bloodline. The night I told them about Zephyr, my father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You will end this farce immediately," he had sputtered, "or you'll never see a penny of Blackwood money again." I can still feel the sting of my mother's palm against my cheek when I refused. "You ungrateful little fool," she had hissed. "You'll regret this day for the rest of your life." They threw me out that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the fire of defiance in my heart. For 3 long years, Zephyr and I struggled, working multiple jobs, living in a tiny apartment that leaked when it rained. But we had love, and for a while, that was enough. Until it wasn't. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. Quentin Frost, my grandfather's longtime lawyer, his voice grave on the other end of the line. "Miss Blackwood, there's something you need to know about your grandfather's will." My heart raced as I listened to Quentin explain how my grandfather, Cyrus Blackwood, had seen through my parents' materialism long before I did. In a final act of defiance against their greed, he had secretly transferred the majority of Blackwood Industries shares to me on my 18th birthday. "You're the majority shareholder, Miss Blackwood," Quentin said, his words hitting me like a tidal wave. "You own the company." As I stood in that boardroom now, facing the slack-jawed expressions of the board members and the horrified faces of my parents, I felt a surge of power I'd never known before. The prodigal daughter had returned, but not as the penitent they might have hoped for. "Mr. Frost," I said, nodding to Quentin who stood by the door, "please distribute the documents proving my ownership." As the papers circulated, I locked eyes with my father. The once imposing man seemed to shrink before me, his complexion ashen. My mother's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with dawning terror. "Avery," my father started, his voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we can explain." I raised a hand, silencing him. "Save it," I said, ice in my veins. "You made your choice 3 years ago. Now it's my turn." The room held its breath as I moved towards the head of the table, my birthright. With each step, I shed the last vestiges of the naive girl I once was. In her place stood a woman tempered by hardship and fueled by righteous anger. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I allowed myself a small, dangerous smile. "Now," I said, my voice ringing with authority, "let's discuss the future of Blackwood Industries." The game had begun, and I intended to win. Little did they know this was just the opening move in a chess match years in the making. My parents thought they had broken me, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. And Zephyr? He was waiting outside, ready to stand by my side as we reshaped the empire that once rejected us. The future stretched before us, a canvas, waiting to be painted with the bold strokes of our ambition and the delicate hues of our love. But first, there was a debt to be settled, and I intended to collect with interest. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the polished mahogany table. "For those who haven't been paying attention," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "allow me to catch you up on recent developments." I could see the panic in my father's eyes as he realized the extent of his powerlessness. Cordelia, my mother, sat rigid in her chair, her perfectly coiffed hair at odds with her disheveled composure. Effective immediately, I continued. I'll be assuming the role of CEO. My first order of business? A complete audit of all company finances and operations for the past 5 years. The color drained from my father's face. Now, Avery, he stammered, that's not necessary. We've always run a tight ship here at Blackwood Industries. I raised an eyebrow. Have you, Dad? Because I seem to recall a rather lavish yacht purchase last year. Tell me, was that before or after you kicked your only daughter out onto the street? A murmur rippled through the room. I turned to address the board members directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you I'm not here for petty revenge. I'm here to right a ship that's been slowly sinking under the weight of greed and mismanagement. As I spoke, Quentin distributed another set of documents. These are the results of a preliminary investigation into Blackwood Industries' finances. I think you'll find them illuminating. The rustling of papers filled the room, followed by gasps and whispers. I watched as the realization dawned on their faces. The company they thought was thriving was teetering on the edge of financial ruin. How could you let this happen? One board member demanded, glaring at my father. Thaddeus Blackwood, the man who once loomed so large in my life, now seemed to shrink in his seat. I can explain, he sputtered. Oh, I'm sure you can. I interjected smoothly, and you'll have plenty of time to do so, to the SEC. My mother's head snapped up. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. I met her gaze coolly. Wouldn't I? You seem to have forgotten, Mother, that you raised me to be a Blackwood. And Blackwoods always finish what they start. As the reality of their situation sank in, I could see the fight leaving my parents. They had gambled everything on the belief that I would never return, never discover the truth about my inheritance. Now, they were facing the consequences of their arrogance. But this wasn't just about them. I turned my attention back to the board. I understand that many of you were kept in the dark about the true state of affairs. I'm offering you a choice. Work with me to turn this company around, or tender your resignations now. The room fell silent as the weight of my words settled over them. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, weighing loyalty against self-preservation. As the tension reached its peak, the boardroom door opened. Zephyr stepped in, his presence immediately commanding attention. Gone were the paint-stained jeans and worn t-shirts. In their place was a sharply tailored suit that spoke of quiet confidence and understated power. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice, allow me to introduce Zephyr Crane, our new Chief Creative Officer. The shock on my parents' faces was almost comical. This was the man they had dismissed as a penniless nobody, now standing before them as an equal. Zephyr moved to stand beside me, his hand resting supportively on the back of my chair. I look forward to working with all of you, he said, his voice warm but firm. Avery and I have some exciting plans for the future of Blackwood Industries. As Zephyr began to outline our vision for the company's future, I watched the faces around the table. Some showed interest, others skepticism, but all were captivated. This was the man my parents had deemed unworthy, now effortlessly commanding. A room full of seasoned executives. I caught my mother's eye and saw something I'd never seen before. Regret. But it was too late for that now. The damage had been done, and the time for reconciliation was long past. As the meeting progressed, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. Triumph, yes, but also a deep sadness for what could have been. If only my parents had seen beyond their own prejudices, how different things might have been. But as I looked at Zephyr, his eyes shining with pride and love, I knew that everything had happened exactly as it should. We had been forged in the fires of adversity and emerged stronger for it. The game was far from over, but the opening moves had been made. And as I sat at the head of the table, ready to lead Blackwood Industries into a new era, I knew one thing. For certain, The best revenge wasn't just success, it was rewriting the rules of the game entirely. As the weeks passed, Blackwood Industries underwent a transformation that sent shockwaves through the business world. Zephyr and I worked tirelessly, breathing new life into a company that had grown stagnant under my parents' leadership. One crisp autumn morning, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, gazing out at the New York skyline. The door opened behind me, and I turned to see Silas Thornton, CEO of our biggest rival, Thornton Enterprises. "Impressive view," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and envy. "Almost as impressive as the numbers you've been posting lately." I smiled, remembering the days when men like Silas would have dismissed me as nothing more than a pretty face at a charity gala. "I'm glad you could make it, Silas. Please have a seat." As we sat down, I could see him studying me, trying to reconcile the ruthless businesswoman before him with the socialite he thought he knew. "I'll cut to the chase, Avery," he said, leaning forward. "I want to know how you did it. How did you turn Blackwood around so quickly?" I laughed, the sound sharp and clear. "It's simple, Silas. I stopped running the company like it was a personal piggy bank and started treating it like a business." His eyes narrowed. "And your parents? Word on the street is they're facing some serious legal troubles." "They made their choices," I replied, my voice cold. "Now they're facing the consequences." Just then, my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Blackwood, your parents are here to see you." I felt a flicker of surprise. This was unexpected. "Send them in," I said, my heart racing despite my calm exterior. Thaddeus and Cordelia Blackwood entered the office, shadows of their former selves. Gone were the designer clothes and air of superiority. In their place stood two people beaten down by their own actions. "Avery," my father began, his voice hoarse. We need to talk." I gestured to the chairs in front of my desk. "By all means, talk." As they sat down, I could see Silas watching the scene unfold with barely concealed fascination. This was high drama, playing out in the upper echelons of New York's business world. "We've lost everything," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The house, the cars, our reputation. It's all gone." I leaned back in my chair, studying them. Part of me wanted to revel in their downfall, to throw their cruelty back in their faces. But as I looked at them, I felt something unexpected. Pity. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steady. My father looked up, his eyes filled with a desperation I'd never seen before. "A second chance," he said. "A job. Any job. We have nowhere else to go." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I had been the one begging for understanding, for acceptance. Now, the tables had turned. I stood up, walking to the window again. The city stretched out before me, a testament to the power I now wielded. I could crush them with a word, destroy what little they had left. But as I turned back to face them, I saw something else. An opportunity. Not for reconciliation. That bridge had long since burned. But for something more valuable. A chance. To prove that I was better than they ever were. "You want a job?" I said, my voice firm. "Fine. You can start in the mailroom. Minimum wage, no benefits. You'll work your way up like everyone else." The shock on their faces was almost comical. But we're your parents," my mother sputtered. "No," I replied, my voice ice cold. "You lost that right when you threw me out. Now you're just employees, disposable ones at that." As they left, shoulders slumped in defeat, Silas let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Avery." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Consider yourself reminded, Silas. Now, shall we discuss that merger proposal of yours?" As we delved into business talk, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had faced my demons and emerged victorious. The past was behind me, and the future. Well, the future was mine to shape. Later that evening, as Zephyr and I stood on the balcony of our penthouse, glasses of champagne in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "To new beginnings," Zephyr said, raising his glass. I clinked my glass against his, looking out at Wau, the city that had once rejected me and now lay at my feet. "To new beginnings," I echoed, "and to writing our own stories." As we kissed, the lights of the city twinkling below us, I knew that this was just the beginning. The game had changed, and I was holding all the cards. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. After all, I was Avery Blackwood, and Blackwoods always finish what they start. The autumn chill gave way to winter's bite as Blackwood Industries continued its meteoric rise. Our innovative approach to sustainable technology had caught the world's attention, and suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of what we were building. One frosty December morning, I found myself in a sleek conference room in Tokyo, facing a panel of stern-faced Japanese executives. The stakes were high, a partnership that could revolutionize clean energy production across Asia. "Ms. Blackwood," the lead executive, Mr. Tanaka, began, "your proposals are ambitious, perhaps too ambitious." I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "Mr. Tanaka, when I took over Blackwood Industries, people said the same thing. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now." As I launched into my presentation, I could feel the room's energy shift. These men had expected a soft touch, someone they could easily dismiss. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a force of nature. Hours later, as we toasted the newly signed agreement with sake, Mr. Tanaka pulled me aside. "You remind me of someone," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow, curious. He nodded sagely. "Your grandfather, Cyrus Blackwood. He too had vision that others lacked." The comparison caught me off guard. In all the chaos of the past year, I'd rarely allowed myself to think about the man who had set this all in motion. "You knew my grandfather?" Mr. Tanaka smiled. "We were rivals, then partners, then friends. He spoke of you often, you know. Said you had a fire in you that your parents lacked." I felt a lump form in my throat. I wish I had known him better. "Perhaps you know him better than you think," Mr. Tanaka replied cryptically before rejoining the celebration. That night, as I FaceTimed with Zephyr from my hotel room, his face a welcome sight after a week apart, I couldn't shake Mr. Tanaka's words from my mind. "You okay, Avery?" Zephyr asked, noticing my distraction. "You just closed the biggest deal in company history. You should be over the moon." I sighed, sinking onto the plush hotel bed. "I am. It's just, I keep thinking about my grandfather, about the legacy he left me." Zephyr's eyes softened with understanding. "You're not just thinking about the company, are you?" "No," I admitted. "I'm thinking about forgiveness." The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Zephyr knew better than anyone the depth of pain my parents had caused me. "Are you considering—" I shook my head, cutting him off. "Not forgiveness for them. Forgiveness for myself." Zephyr's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, finally voicing the thoughts that had been swirling in my mind. "I've been so focused on proving them wrong, on getting revenge, that I haven't stopped to think about what I really want, who I really want to be." "And who is that?" Zephyr asked gently. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Someone who builds things up instead of tearing them down. Someone who creates a legacy of her own, not just lives in the shadow of others." Zephyr's face broke into a proud grin. "Now that sounds like the Avery Blackwood I fell in love with." As we talked late into the night, plans and dreams flowing freely, I felt a shift within myself. The anger that had fueled me for so long began to ebb, replaced by something stronger, more sustainable. The next morning, as my plane took off from Tokyo, I made a decision. It was time to write a new chapter. not just for Blackwood Industries, but for myself. Little did I know, the biggest challenge of all was waiting for me back in New York. A challenge that would test not just my business acumen, but the very core of who I had become. The New York skyline materialized through the airplane window, a familiar silhouette against the setting sun. As the wheels touched down, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Quentin Frost. Emergency board meeting called. Silas Thornton, attempting hostile takeover. My blood ran cold. Silas, the ever-opportunistic shark, had finally made his move. I barely registered the taxi ride from JFK to Blackwood Tower, my mind racing through potential scenarios and counter-moves. As I burst into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Silas sat at the far end of the table, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Ah, Avery. So glad you could join us. I was just explaining to the board how Thornton Enterprises resources could salvage what's left of Blackwood Industries." I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but forced it down. This wasn't the time for emotion. "Is that so, Silas? And here I thought we were partners after our last meeting." His smile never wavered. "Business is business, my dear. Nothing personal." I turned to address the board, noting the uncertainty in their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand Mr. Thornton has made what seems like an attractive offer. But before you make any decisions, I think you should see this." With a nod to Quentin, the lights dimmed and a projection screen descended. What followed was a meticulous presentation of Blackwood's latest innovations: clean energy solutions, sustainable manufacturing processes, and AI-driven efficiency systems that were light years ahead of the competition. As the lights came up, I locked eyes with each board member. "This is our future, not just Blackwood's, but the world's. Are you really willing to let that go for a quick profit?" Silas scoffed. "Pretty pictures and pipe dreams. Where's the profit? In all this idealism, Avery?" I turned to him, my voice steady. "The profit, Silas, is in shaping the future instead of clinging to the past. It's in building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports and stock prices." For the next hour, I laid out my vision for Blackwood Industries, a company at the forefront of technological and environmental innovation. As I spoke, I could see the tide turning, the doubt in the board members' eyes replaced by excitement and possibility. Silas, sensing his plan unraveling, made a last-ditch effort. "This is all very inspiring, but let's talk numbers. My offer stands at—" "Your offer," I cut him off, "is no longer on the table." I nodded to Quentin, who distributed a new set of documents. "While in Tokyo, I secured partnerships that have just increased our market value by 40%. Your hostile takeover, Silas, is now financially impossible." The room erupted in murmurs as Silas's face turned an alarming shade of red. He stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This isn't over, Avery. You haven't heard the last of me." As he stormed out, I couldn't help but call after him. "Looking forward to our next partnership meeting, Silas." The boardroom dissolved into relieved laughter, the tension finally breaking. As congratulations poured in, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Margaret Holloway, the oldest serving board member and a close friend of my grandfather's. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, her eyes misty. "You've not just saved his company, Avery. You've given it a soul." Later that night, as Zephyr and I celebrated on our balcony, the city lights twinkling below, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "To the future," Zephyr toasted, raising his glass. I clinked my glass against his, smiling. "To building something that matters." As we looked out over the city, I realized that my journey had come full circle. I'd started out seeking revenge, but found something far more valuable along the way: purpose. The Blackwood name would no longer be synonymous with greed and power. Instead, it would stand for innovation, sustainability, and positive change. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. The years that followed were a whirlwind of innovation, growth, and unexpected challenges. Blackwood Industries became a beacon of progressive business practices, attracting the brightest minds from around the globe. Our sustainable technologies were changing lives from New York to Nairobi, and our stock price reflected our success. But as we scaled new heights, I found myself grappling with an unfamiliar emotion: restlessness. The thrill of victory had faded, replaced by a gnawing question: what next? It was a crisp autumn morning when I received the call that would answer that question. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, head of a struggling inner-city hospital. "Ms. Blackwood," she said, her voice strained, "I know this is unorthodox, but we're desperate. Our funding's been cut, and we're facing closure. Your clean energy solutions could save us millions in operating costs, but we can't afford the initial investment." I listened intently, an idea forming. "Dr. Rodriguez, I think I might have a solution. Give me 48 hours. The next 2 days were a frenzy of activity. By the time I walked into the hospital, I had a plan that would not only save it, but revolutionize healthcare accessibility. As I laid out my proposal to the hospital board, a partnership that would use Blackwood's technology to slash operating costs and redirect funds to patient care, I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. My mother, Cordelia, now working as a hospital volunteer, her eyes wide with surprise. Our gazes locked for a moment, years of unspoken words passing between us. But this wasn't the time for personal drama. I pressed on with my presentation, outlining a vision of affordable, high-quality healthcare powered by sustainable technology. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Dr. Rodriguez, tears in her eyes, grasped my hands. "You've not just saved our hospital, Ms. Blackwood. You've given hope to thousands of families." As the crowd dispersed, Cordelia approached hesitantly. "Avery," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what you've done here, it's remarkable." I studied, her face noting the lines of hardship etched around her eyes. "Thank you," I replied, my tone neutral. She wrung her hands, a gesture so unlike the poised woman I'd grown up with. "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance we could talk? Really talk?" I felt a flash of the old anger, but it faded quickly, replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps even a flicker of hope. "I can't promise anything," I said carefully, "but I'm willing to listen." As we agreed to meet for coffee the following week, I realized that this, facing my past with grace and openness, was perhaps the greatest test of my newfound strength. That evening, as Zephyr and I walked through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet, I shared the day's events. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "After everything they put you through." I squeezed his hand, smiling. "I'm not sure of anything. But I know that the woman who walked into that hospital today is not the same angry girl who was thrown out of her home years ago. I'm stronger now, and part of that strength is knowing I don't have to be ruled by the past." Zephyr pulled me close, kissing my forehead. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." As we continued our walk, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, I felt a sense of anticipation. The journey that had begun with a quest for revenge had led me to places I never could have imagined, to success beyond my wildest dreams, to love, and now, potentially, to healing. I didn't know what the future held, whether reconciliation with my parents was possible, or if this new venture in healthcare would succeed. But I did know one thing. I was ready to face whatever came next, not as a victim seeking retribution, but as a woman standing tall in her own power. The girl who had been cast out years ago was gone. In her place stood Avery Blackwood, entrepreneur, innovator, and architect of her own destiny, and her story was far from over. As night fell over New York City, I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city's glow, and smiled. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't in destroying those who had hurt me. It was in building a life so full of purpose and meaning that the past lost its power to wound. And that journey, I knew, was